My name is Sydney Kamlager, and I am the senator for the 30th Senate District, representing parts of Los Angeles, parts of Inglewood, and all of Culver City. I want to thank you all for joining me this early evening with three amazing panelists to talk about an incredibly important and timely issue, which is our mental health. The importance of taking care of our mental health has risen to the global stage. We have witnessed amazing trailblazers like Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles acknowledge their mental health and ask that we acknowledge them as they put their mental health and their physical health first. But I am sure we have also had conversations with family members and friends and folks that are not very famous at all about these very same issues. There was just an article in the news a few days ago that talked about depression and how it is on the rise for our young adults. It talked about what it means to wake up feeling sad, to have sad days, when it is important to take a mental health day, what feelings of vulnerability mean. And so I thought it would make sense for us to have a discussion with some experts, both from the psychological and the mental and the spiritual space, to inform us about ways that we can acknowledge and take care of our mental health and support the mental health of others. It's become incredibly important during a time of COVID when everything feels topsy-turvy. So what I'm going to do is, instead of botching up any introductions and not giving folks their true due, I am going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves briefly. Each will have a minute, and then we will get into the discussion to demystify some of the issues and de-shroud some of the concerns around mental health. So first, why don't we start with Sherry Patton, the clinical director at WIN LA. I would love it if you would introduce yourself for the folks in the virtual space.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy evening to you all. My name is Sherry Patton. I'm actually filling in for our clinical director, Dr. Wendy Sun. I am the community resource coordinator for the home team at WIN. My background lies heavily with children and families, as I have been in this field for over 15 years, more specifically in the 0 to 5 population, in the Head Start and early Head Start background. I am also a certified parent educator, domestic violence facilitator, as well as anger management facilitator as well. So my work lies heavily in the mental health space realm of the work that we do. Thank you.
Fabulous. Yes. And I'm sure we will have some questions around mental health in young people, especially as young folks are gearing up to go back to school, and the teachers that have to teach them and the family members who are rooting for their success. Next, I would love to have the Reverend Kelvin Sauls introduce himself. He is the Interfaith Director for Community Health Councils, but he is also a spiritual guru for so many of us in Los Angeles.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're having a terrific Tuesday. Thank you so much, Senator. It's good to see you, and good to see all of our other panelists. It is indeed an honor for me to be with you, just to share some perspective around, mental health and spirituality. And I am a faith-rooted community organizer, born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. And so I live at the intersection of South Los Angeles and South Africa, especially given what's going on. I'm the former senior pastor at Homer United Methodist Church. I'm part of Clergy for Black Lives, and I seek to live out my faith, where faith and health comes together. And I'll share more about that, as part of our time together. But I said yes to be here tonight because I do believe, Senator Kamlager Duff, that mental health is our health. And so looking forward to listening, learning, and sharing and serving tonight with you.
Thank you. And I feel the wonderful vibrations already And lastly, I would love to have Dr. Robert Byrd, who is the acting deputy director of the Prevention Services Division for LA County Department of Mental Health. Now, that is a mouthful. I would love it if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I feel very privileged to be here and share this space with these other panelists. I do work for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. I'm transitioning to a fairly new role, or actually closing the circle from when I first came to the Department of Mental Health and started rolling out prevention services. So I'm kind of going back to where it all started. Immediately prior to this, I've been working with LA County Department of Children and Family Services and LA County Department of Probation with youth who are involved with those systems as well as the mental health system. And really looking at over the past 5 to 7 years, really launching trauma-informed services and trauma-informed care, which has become increasingly more needed over the past 18 months of this pandemic. So I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy to have you. And I am going to go right into the first question because I'm very interested in what each of you have to say. So the theme for this evening's town hall is growth after trauma. And we know all too well that COVID has had a devastating health, mental health, and economic impact on the world and on Los Angeles in the state of California. So much so that it's being considered a collective trauma. And in fact, more and more you actually hear folks talk about trauma, I think, than ever before in years past. So given the spaces that each of you work in, I would love it if each of you could touch on some of the types of mental health stressors that you have seen your patients and your communities experience during the COVID pandemic. Up till now, I guess we're still in this. So I would love it if we could start with you, Dr. Byrd. And you're on mute.
Yes. It happens at least once every call. It's been really challenging because I think that I predominantly work in building out services for children and youth. And children and youth sometimes have more challenges expressing what they're experiencing. But one of the things we've seen really clearly is the lack of connectedness or connections. So individuals who used to go to school and have all of their friends around all the time suddenly got pulled out and isolated and lost those connections. And with that came a lot of grief and loss of their kind of role in the world, loss of their sense of self, loss of people that they had just met and were building friendships with, lots of milestones. We saw this around a lot of high school graduations and those transitions from middle school to high school or elementary to middle school. So these just built in transitional periods that are rites of passage that, people want to celebrate were pulled away from people. And so it was a pretty big loss. As you mentioned at the beginning, we've seen rates of depression and anxiety increase pretty significantly in the community. With the children and youth involved with DCFS and probation, we've seen a pretty fair amount or a pretty big increase of substance use. So I think that combined with, kind of a loss of motivation, and then anxiety that's embedded with returning to school. So when school started going back toward the end of last school year, a lot of fear and anxiety about going back, even concerns about joining camps and recreational activities, and with parents, worries about returning to the workplace. And will they be safe? Will they be taking something home to their families? So it's been pretty devastating.
Yeah, that's heavy. Pastor Sauls, I would love it if you could share your thoughts on what you have seen, the kinds of mental stressors that you have seen in your community and with the folks that you're working with?
Yes, certainly. I think the two bookends that I just want to lift up. One is I appreciate the fact that we are talking about, acknowledging the trauma that's going on. And so having said that, I think it is essential that no matter what we do, from whatever perspective, that it be trauma informed. And the reason for that is the second bookend I'd like to make, Senator Kamlager, which is that, we are dealing with several epidemics that connected with the pandemic. And so these epidemics did not, stop, right? The pandemic in so many ways just exacerbated, these epidemics. And I named some of them that we've, experienced, in the community. So I think it's so important that we realize that what we're going through right now is just the convergence, if you will, of several epidemics that I know you and I have worked on in the community, continue to do so, and this pandemic now, and those epidemics, I would just categorize around, what we call in South LA the drivers of disparity. I can remember in anticipation of COVID and the shutdowns, I was working in with community health councils in a program called the Healthy Kids Zone in Southeast LA around the Fremont High School community, dealing with the students there, the staff, as well as the residents within a half-mile radius of Fremont High School. And we did some quick focus groups asking folk, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What do you think you're going to be needing around that? And they mentioned the drivers of disparity. Let me lift up the first one, which is because South Los Angeles is considered a food desert, food insecurity, rose to the top quickly. And so we knew then that we're going to have to do something around providing food for people, whether it's non-perishable food, or whether it is actually grab-and-go meals. And so we complemented what the Los Angeles, Unified School District did, at Fremont High School. They provided lunch, breakfast and lunches. So we then organized ourselves, into, a compassion initiative, located at the Peace Chapel Church with several of our partners. And we then provided grab-and-go meals for dinner, because of that food, insecurity piece. The other one, of course, economic insecurity, high unemployment. You are aware of that. And so now, given, what was, about to happen economically as a result of the pandemic, that just exacerbated, just the economic insecurity of, our families. Let me lift up the next one, which is the safety issue. Now, it was not just safety, in general in, South Los Angeles as we deal with, a law enforcement, the campaign Stop the Stops and all that we're trying to deal with around that, right? But also now the students had to be at home, right? And not every home is safe. We had to come to terms with that in a painful way. Fremont High School has a teenage or student health center, right? And so when we were talking about what needs to happen there, people wanted to shut down the student health center, and we heard from the students, and they said no, because we might need to get to that health center, because of some of the things we might be experiencing at home, you see, such as, sexual, trauma, et cetera, et cetera. So the safety piece was just exacerbated around that. We are still dealing with the digital divide. And so LAUSD shuts down and says, hey, go ahead and we're going to do school at home. Then we discovered, that a lot of folk did not have internet access, did not have computers, and all of that. So LAUSD had to backtrack after we were in communication with them and say, you know what, let's take a step back and see, how do we deal with, that whole piece. So this was, all of this was just going on within the first, pre-COVID, before the shutdown, and all of that into the first 3 or 4 months, because we all had to figure all of this out. And then, of course, with all of that, the mental, stresses, that come with all of it, and how to deal with, what does it mean to be socially distant? We are social people, right? And so we actually changed that word from socially distant to physically. Let's do physical distance, right? Because we know that we can just kind of rethink how we can be social with one another without necessarily, having to mess up that 6 feet, distance, around that. The final one I'll lift up is, of course, the ongoing challenge of health inequity. And so we had to come to terms now with spiritually, emotionally, etc., not being able, or being able to figure out now how we're going to deal, with all of this. And then, of course, churches then, could not gather anymore. I'm not going to use the term the church is closed, because I don't believe the church can close,
right.
What's your understanding of church? But churches could not gather for worship, right? And that was, also another, stressor, around that. So I just want to lift up all of those, but really it just boils down to the fact that, we just saw the convergence, of several, epidemics with the pandemic, and really try to navigate that in such a way to make sure that people remain well, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, as we made our way, through the pandemic.
Thank you for that. And Sherry, I think Pastor Sauls offered some perfect segues for you. He really did talk about how overwhelming COVID has been from a number of different aspects. Would love for you to talk about some of the mental health stressors that you have seen in some of your patients and communities. We touched upon sort of the public safety, domestic violence, lack of access to some of the services that you would normally be able to get, especially as a young person, but also probably as parents that also use certain services. But would love for you to sort of expand from your perspective.
Yes. Parents became hall monitors, teachers, trainers, all of that in a very, very short period of time. In 24 hours, they had to figure out how to get kiddos up to get on screen, how to also do their work from home, how to figure out, routine changes with lunch and dinner and breakfast, again, which a lot of our families, the school took care of those things, right? And then in the 0 to 5 population, we had the services for the developmentally delayed. Now, speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, all of these things were online for some, not for others, because there's the internet challenge. There is not having the tablets and, the laptops. And if they did have them in the home, there were competing priorities. Do my high schooler, who this is their senior year, take the laptop and get on for school? Or do I put my child who has level 2 or level 4 autism on for ABA therapy? And then on top of that, majority of the families lost their jobs. So now I have to deal with school. I have to figure out the food insecurity piece. I feel inadequate as a parent because I have no clue with the math and the reading and the language that they're doing in school. And then I have to figure out how to pay the rent, how to pay the bills. And then the majority of the things, resources that were out there for parents in terms of connecting, we're mainly in English. So we are doing IEP meetings online right now. We have to sign an IEP document on DocuSign. What is DocuSign? Parents have no clue how to maneuver DocuSign to get IEP meetings and regional center appointments. We're also having physical exams online. My child is sick, but I can't take them to the hospital. There's all of these challenges that presented themselves. And then there was the piece with relationships within the families, right? So is mom going to do this? Is dad going to do this? How are we going to make this work? So everyone had to really take a step back and really pivot quickly, but no one was prepared for that. So now our families really had to deal with all these competing priorities through exhaustion, through fatigue, through feeling insecure and the lack of confidence, and then also deal with the fact that I'm not in a safe home. There's a partner, maybe or maybe not, right? And then trying to figure out how am I going to get my children the best care, but then there's not a lot of options available. And if they are, I'm on the phone for hours on end until someone picks up the phone to give me the help that I need, because I can't just go to the office anymore. So, it became very challenging for our families to deal with that from an educational and developmental perspective in the 0 to 5 population.
So I have to say, I'm overwhelmed just listening to each of you recap the stressors that you all saw exhibited. And I was starting to think about not only on top of what each of you said, but the feelings of isolation, not being able to connect with family and friends that you're used to talking to, not being able to celebrate those special occasions, other health ailments and diseases that were going on in folks' lives unrelated to COVID, but maybe exacerbated by, or just not being able to, feel like because you don't have COVID, maybe you don't deserve to go to the hospital. And then Zoom is great, but it also gives folks a window into your own life. And there's anxiety probably around what people are seeing when they're looking in the camera and what's going on in your house and in your space. So following on what you all said, I would love if we could now sort of flip it. And given all of these hardships that each of you all expressed, how have you also seen communities turn this collective trauma into an opportunity for growth and resilience? So can you share a little bit in about 5 or 6 minutes total for all of you, what you all have seen in terms of people being able to exhibit resilience and grow from this? We will start with you, Sherry. We'll go backward.
Yes, we saw other agencies and other communities banding together. We saw schools figure out how to get lunches to students, understanding that there was food insecurities. We saw the districts giving out computers and laptops and electronics. We, saw school districts trying to help parents and come alongside them. Even within our own agency, we have helped families with rental support, utility support. We have provided a lot of support, and then other agencies have come together and banded together with trauma-informed care. Like, what does that mean now? Because I think trauma-informed care meant something different in the past. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to kind of repivot and understand from a different perspective that everyone was going through the same thing, right? And so how do we use that knowledge to now expand the types of services that we've offered? So many agencies have developed new services that they didn't have before now, because we had to shift to figure out how do we effectively go forth and provide all of the services, and now then some additional services, additional resources, not just to our families, but to communities, because we also saw so many agencies shut down. We saw so many standing community organizations, the local store, the local dance agency, all of those things shut down. And so seeing, individuals banding together, using that space, to provide assistance for families where it used to be a dance studio, so we saw reconfigurations change across the board.
We did. There has been a lot of innovation around how to sort of keep us connected. Pastor Sauls, would love your perspective on the kind of growth and resiliency that you have seen coming from communities as a way to combat the mental hardships faced by COVID.
But it took place in a variety of ways. I mean, I think one thing that, we know is that, there is a lot of, resilience in our community. I think that's very, very important. One of my favorite line, in Lift Every Voice and Sing is facing the rising sun, and I really love that because, that hymn was written in 1900, where for Black folk, really, James Weldon Johnson could have written facing the setting sun, right? But instead, he chose to write facing the rising sun. And I think that really captures for me how, folk did come together, what I would call, within a collective, a collaborative, and within community, around that. Of course, in the United States, we are afflicted, by extreme individualism. And in many, many ways, that continues to, kind of challenge how we are responding to, COVID-19 right now. But what I really sense, was really folk rising above, mere individual concerns and really looking for meaningful ways to look out for one another, to care for one another. I mean, it was amazing that we were able to pull together, a community collaborative called the Coronavirus Community Compassion Initiative. Folk from organizations from different sectors, that really worked hard to kind of rethink in creative ways how to serve. I mean, Community Health Councils manages, First 5 LA, funds. And so when we couldn't use the funds for what it was budgeted for, community meetings, gatherings and all of that, those local councils, came together to say, seeing that we cannot meet, how can we rethink how to utilize these funds for what we need right now? And so the second phase of our food distribution, community health councils came on board, CELA came on board, CELA connected us with local farmers, and so we were able to move from giving, grab and go meals, every night to once a week, really providing fresh produce, eggs, et cetera, for an entire family that could last them for a week. And so we were able to just the innovation, the intentionality, the coordination, and the care, I would really say was very, very phenomenal, in terms of that. And so the other piece that we were able to continue, was in collaboration with a community coalition. We continue to do healing circles, and even those, you got to meet somewhere. We were able to move those to virtual and to hybrid at times, just to create a space, for people, to continue to come to terms with, what does mindfulness mean? How do we just, go through some exercises, breathing exercises, et cetera, in terms of helping people, work through this. And it really became like these opportunities for group therapy, as we did that. A lot of congregations, really worked hard to see how they could turn their worship service into worship through service. You see, now that we cannot gather, for worship, what else can we do in terms of, facilitating compassionate acts, which is a sign of worship. So you gotta have to work with a few folk around that, but once people made the connection, it was just extremely powerful, around that. And later on, churches became testing sites. Later on, churches became vaccination sites. So just the real, intentionality of how folk really look for ways to rethink who they are, to repurpose what they have to meet the needs. The final one I'll say, is really folk had to come to terms with the fact that worship is, or the church is not a place somewhere, but the church is God's presence everywhere. So seeing that we cannot gather in the sanctuary, how do we begin to understand sanctuary where we are, right? After all, scripture says where 2 and 3 are gathered, not where 200 and 300 are gathered, right? It said where 2 and 3 are gathered, there I will be, in them. So folk had to come to terms with their personal spirituality, their personal relationship with the divine, right? And how to continue to develop that and make sure that it doesn't become private. But because of COVID-19, we can now publicly live that out as we care for, our community, as we collaborate, for collective impact, and as we continue to pursue, our beloved community.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. And Dr. Byrd, I would love for you to share some of the growth and resilience that you have seen. And you sort of touched upon a number of departments that you work with. You talked about DCFS, you talked about probation, and these are departments that are dealing with, troubled situations, folks that need multiple kinds of services and resources and supports. I would say they are not low-hanging fruit. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on what you've been able to see, especially in those spaces around people kind of sharing growth and showing resilience during this time.
Sure. So I think it cannot be overstated that COVID propelled the breakthrough of innovative solutions. I mean, virtual mental health services happening at the volume and rate that they're happening, making sure that we have platforms available for people to access mental health services, pulling departments together to make sure that staff had supports, that families and individuals we're working with have supports. Our partnership with LACO to really build out a dedicated line for resources and linkage to mental health services. So as school teachers or administrators became aware of a family who might be in need, they could refer the family to a dedicated line through the Los Angeles County Department of Education and have resources available to them. I mean, it was really incredible. I think looking at how our residential providers, where some of our child welfare youth and probation youth are placed, how they rallied around their staff to provide PPE, to make sure that the staff were safe and that the children and youth in placement were safe and not being exposed to people coming and going from a residential group home or a STRTP. I also think that a lot of our residential providers took an opportunity during the social unrest around racial inequity to really work with the youth that were in placement around what this means, and taking an opportunity to give the youth voice and give them an opportunity to express their experiences. Some providers helped youth write letters to their senators and Congress people. Some providers brought in speakers virtually. And so it was a really good way to support the youth that were there and give them a voice and have them participate in what activities they wanted to engage in. I think in the communities, we saw families involved with some of the marches and protests. And so there was this collective voice raising up to support our communities. I have the number of Black Lives Matter flags, banners, signs that I have seen just driving through our communities is incredibly empowering, and it's fantastic. I think that there's so much community involvement and support around this. And I think that but the other thing we've seen in some of our communities is parents kind of giving themselves permission to take a mental health moment, a mental health day, like tag teaming somebody in their pod that they know where they're going so that they can just say, look, I can't be 24/7 on all the time. I need like a support to just watch these kids for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a half a day. And so I do think that people got really creative about how they develop supports, through this tragedy. And I also think people got creative about how they re-engaged and reconnected with family members after like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months of not being able to see them. So I do think it was an incredibly innovative time that really highlighted people's resilience.
Thank you for that. So we have a question in the chat, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I know we have some other questions, but there is a question in the chat related to seniors, and would love if I could have someone just respond to this question. So please talk about the elders for whom isolation has been a real threat to mental health. And now the fear of gathering leads them to hesitate. So we've had, so many issues where in the beginning, everyone was afraid for the elders to isolate them, to keep them from everyone so that we keep them safe and keep them alive. And then there was a push to make sure that they got vaccinated. Now with the Delta variant, there's still a lot of hesitancy. And then, of course, we don't know what's going on in each family in terms of whether or not everyone has been vaccinated. So would love it, Dr. Byrd, maybe if you could respond to that question about isolation, elders, and helping them move past some of the fear and the hesitancy.
Sure. So through the Department of Mental Health, we have a couple of programs that really focus on our senior population. Prior to COVID, they did a lot of field visits going to the homes, and they transitioned it very seamlessly into telephone visits and then video chats if the individuals had availability for that. So we were able to kind of pivot relatively quickly, given bureaucracies, in terms of how we started providing mental health services. And we did notice, and actually in my building, one of our programs is just like steps away from my office. So I get to hear them very frequently on the phone with their clients, and having conversations about how to reach, how to connect, how to follow up. So I do think that we did change up our services a little bit to make sure that those wellness checks, those therapy appointments were still happening for the people who were engaged with our department.
Great. Thank you for that. Sherry, there's another question that I would like to pose to you. So I know you've been talking a lot around the 0 to 5 population and the focus on how we make sure that we are supporting the mental health and the physical health of our young people. How do I take care of my own mental health when I'm also trying to support the mental health of my family members and my young children?
Yes. Absolutely. One of the things that we tell all of our parents is to understand that our kiddos are looking at every single thing that we do. And part of how I take care of my mental health is like they tell us on the plane, you got to put the mask on yourself first before you can help the person next to you. One thing that, I would like all of our parents to understand is you cannot pour from an empty cup. A part of managing the mental health and the support of your children is to make sure that you are okay. And I would like to echo the sentiments of Dr. Byrd if you got to take those breaks, time them. If you're at home all day still because you're, having to do ABA, you have to do work, you need to do all of these things. Put dedicated breaks in, or just take a step back and have a fun moment with your children. Go outside. You don't have to spend a obscene amount of money and go out in public, because there are a lot of people that are still fearful of being out in public, but go out in the backyard, go out in the front yard, laugh, have a dance break. There are so many free things online in terms of taking a 2-liter bottle, filling them up with water, and making a bowling alley inside of the kitchen with them. There's, several balls in the house. Sometimes we have to take a break back from the worries, from the stressors, trying to figure out our next move from one to the other. When we have weekly activities going on daily, we actually have coffee conversations where parents come together and they do just that. And they're in an authentic, safe space to really talk about the stressors that they're having. There's yoga for children, because one of the things we forgot, they couldn't go outside, which means they wasn't on the playground, which means they were not expending that energy. And so, sometimes that is a mental health break for the parents. Let them go outside and run around while you sit there and take some deep, much, much needed deep breaths in. I think one of the things that we forgot to do and we didn't realize is how often we were not breathing, how often we were not getting oxygen to our brain, because we literally just went into the mode of I had to get done. We went into autopilot. And a part of going on autopilot is we literally stopped breathing. And so when we're taking those little breaks, when we're stopping, and I like to call it that, we're not being selfish, we're being selfful. We're understanding that we have this big opportunity to show others, namely our children, what it means to care for ourselves. Because oftentimes our children learn from the patterns and the things that they see us doing. And then lastly, I would just say the ability to respond versus react. When COVID happened, we had to react. So we had to quickly repivot real quick. But now, since we've been doing this for 1.5 years, we have an opportunity to take a step back, look at it, not necessarily judge it, but look at it and then decide, okay, what moves do I make now moving forward? And again, have those authentic conversations, even with our kids. Oftentimes I've told my son, Mommy is having a challenge right now. She needs a moment, and I will go into the bathroom. I'll take a minute and I'll come right back out. But even naming it with our children so that our children can also see what that looks like so that they can mimic the same things as well.
Fabulous. So we have a number of questions that are coming in. Pastor Sauls, here's a question for you. I've spent so much time, going to church on Sunday and worshiping on Sunday, or sometimes in the evenings during the week. And that routine was changed dramatically because of COVID. And then I'm also questioning, are we living in the Old Testament or are we living in the New Testament because of COVID? And then how am I reconciling all of these epidemics and pandemics that you were talking about? So has the role of our church, of our pastors, of our spiritual guiders, has that changed? How do I reconnect to some of the things that were so important to me in the past as it relates to faith and worship?
Yeah, that's, I think, a question that we will continue to explore. Let me, just talk about the first part of that question, which has to do with the ritual of worship Sunday and for sometimes Wednesday. As I said earlier, while, that is a healthy ritual for communal worship, the pandemic gave us the opportunity to see how we can worship on a daily basis, so you don't have to wait for Sunday. Like, sometimes when I hear people do interviews and a person says something and then they say, well, it's not Sunday, but I'm going to say amen to that. You don't need, God does not function by the parameters that we have. As an infinite God, that is both transcendent yet immanent. That means God is present where we are, yet God is beyond, where we are. We cannot, try to, put God in our chronos time and calendars, right? And I think that's very, very important to understand. That the one of the lessons that COVID provided for us is, how am I, spending time with my Creator, with my Redeemer, with my Sustainer? So meditation becomes very, very important. Walking and listening to mindfulness, apps and all of that, solitude opportunities, that becomes important for us around that. So while we couldn't get together communally, we can always still get together, by ourselves. After all, Scripture tells us that God inhabits the praises of His people, whether we come together collectively or individually around that. We have access to God's love, God's hope, and God's compassion. In terms of the adjustments that the church itself has to make, yes, that we cannot now think that we're going to go back to what was, quote, normal, because truth be told, that normal was very much abnormal because of all of the epidemics that we had to deal with prior to the pandemic. So to say we're going back to normal, that's very alarming to me and very challenging to me, because in so many ways we have normalized the abnormal, which was pre-pandemic. And so I think the opportunity for us here is to really see how do we raise the bar around, disrupting and dismantling those drivers of disparity.
Absolutely.
So that invites us into how now the church and pastors, have to, really take their role, as both pastor, priest, and prophet, very, very serious in terms of the work that we have to do, around racial equity, the work that we have to do around dealing with institutional racism, the work that we have to do around, where is the church in terms of moving us towards, a kingdom, right? Not just kingdom, K-I-N, D-O-M, which is really an invitation to see how do we connect with one another at much deeper and broader level, beyond whatever, limitations, that we've put on ourselves. And the whole piece about sacred resistance now becomes very, very important, for faith leaders in terms of how do we move this country forward, beyond the deception that's going on, beyond the denial that's going on, beyond the division that's going on, beyond the discrimination, beyond, the destruction that's taking place, to really see how we can engage in moral reimagination of who we really can be, must be, as, not just people of faith, but people of faith, within this broader nation called the United States of America.
Thank you for that. So I want to get to a few more questions before we end, and we're going to end in about 10 minutes or so. So hoping this can be considered a lightning round. Dr. Byrd, I have a question for you. Can you talk about mental health and addiction and alcoholism? What you've seen play out because of COVID, how we can be more helpful to those who are suffering from addiction. Maybe you can share some resources that are also available.
Sure. So over the past many months, we've been working more closely with the Department of Public Health, where our substance abuse prevention services are housed for LA County, and trying to bridge the gap between the mental health side and the substance use side, because we have seen an uptick of substance use in staff in our population. We've seen it as people are trying to cope with the huge challenges they face. they tend to rely on maybe less positive coping resources. So there has been in LA County and across the nation an increase in substance use. So our Department of Public Health has contracts with providers throughout LA County. And we have been working with our outpatient mental health providers as well as our residential providers to really coordinate and link the providers with each other so that those services are more fluid. We've also been working with Department of Public Health to provide trainings for our mental health providers so that they can better recognize the signs and symptoms of substance use and know those linkages for resources that are available within their community that's serving clients coming to them for services. So that's some of what we've been doing.
That's good. My hope is that all of these things we'll evolve them and find even more innovative ways to deal with a number of the issues and challenges that folks were facing that were probably not being discussed because we'd stigmatized them or we're just kind of living our most full life without being honest with ourselves. Sherry, I have a question for you. This is kind of a two-parter. On the one hand, how do you handle grown children who are going through depression and anxiety and have maybe isolated themselves from their families because of the pandemic? And then on the other hand, what happens to our young people who are going through mental health challenges and are living with a parent that doesn't want to acknowledge that mental health issues can exist at a young age?
Yes. So one of the things we saw was generalized anxiety disorder spike up with our young children, especially when it came to them now having to be on camera from COVID. You took your shy kiddos who were able to sit in the back of the classroom, go unnoticed, who now had to be on camera and turn their cameras on, right? And then they're all already going through this very adolescent puberty stage period where they're already feeling awkward and, having some challenges. So we're seeing a lot of OCD. One of the things that I think is important for us to do is help our teens and our young adults, our young children to label those feelings, help them to get acclimated with what they're feeling, when the anxiety starts to rise, understanding that they may have a headache because that's a sign of anxiety. Their heart may be beating very fast, and give them some education on what to do, deep breathing, taking deep breaths, and labeling, I am safe or not. And if they're not safe, giving them options to be able to connect with other people who can help them through those things that they're experiencing. Same thing with them living with a parent. Oftentimes, the majority of that went unnoticed prior to the pandemic because the parents were out of the house during the day because they were working. Now they're in a place with parents who are struggling. And unfortunately, in our Black and Brown community, the subject of mental health is still continuing to be taboo. We have a ways to go with that. So understanding that although a parent may not be susceptible in understanding that there are some mental health challenges that lie within the home, but again, giving the teens and the young adults ways to be able to deal with that in safe spaces, to be able to talk to people, whether it's talking to their school psychologist in terms of how to get tips to, try to help them, but then also ensuring that we're not pushing people that are not ready. Some of our parents, again, because it's so taboo, we have to be very sensitive in how we approach that. And we have to be very sensitive in terms of the labels that mental health has given and the stigma that it has given adults as well. And then label those things for our parents. Your child is feeling this and this is what that means, as opposed to kind of tie in the mental health piece, because that's when you lose our Black and Brown community, when you tie it to a mental health piece. But just tying it to this is the experience of your child, you're typically more often able to get a parent to understand from that perspective, as opposed to tying it to therapy or mental health.
Labels without judgment.
Yes.
Yeah. So Christina shared something, and I think this is going to be a great way for us to end this. She said, in response to the question on seniors, she read an article where volunteers of a nonprofit organization participated in a study where seniors received a phone call 5 times a week, and this greatly reduced their symptoms of depression. So in the spirit of Christina's share, I was wondering before as a way to close this out, if you could each share one word, something that you invite our listeners to do to help them experience, connect, or reconnect to joy. So Dr. Byrd, why don't we start with you?
Breathe.
Breathe. I love it. Pastor Sauls. You're on mute.
Thank you. I would say awareness.
Awareness. I love it. And Sherry.
Yes, write down 3 positive things that happen to you every single day.
I love it. So practice awareness, practice breathing, and write down 3 things that are positive that happen to you today. I think that is a great way for us to close out this discussion, talking about mental health, mental awareness, and spiritual connectivity. We are not just collectively experiencing COVID, but I believe that we are collectively experiencing a pathway through to stronger community, but that is really uncomfortable and really scary and probably layered on top of a health pandemic. It can feel overwhelming, but we have shown through the examples that you all have shared that resiliency and growth is out there. It's just how we tap into it through utilizing the resources that are available to us at our clinics, at our schools, at our healthcare centers, in our places of worship, and on the streets protesting for greater justice. So I am going to breathe. I am going to practice awareness. And before I go to sleep tonight, I am going to write down 3 things that were positive in my life today. And I want to thank you, Dr. Byrd. I want to thank you always, Pastor Sauls. And I want to thank you, Sherry Patton, for enlightening us and educating us on what's happening in our communities and to our own bodies in ways that we can protect and heal ourselves and each other. So good night, everyone.